Welcome to the week 29 session. Last week we shared a lot about how to capture opportunities, how to identify opportunities, especially in an African market. But as we were sharing on identifying opportunities and capturing them, I then shared a ladder that I called the vision ladder. The vision ladder has one goal, which is to lead an entrepreneur from a place of darkness where they don't know what opportunities look like to a place where they have captured that opportunity and they have built a thriving enterprise on top of that opportunity. But then something struck me when someone said, how can we build thriving enterprises in an African market, within an African context? Because we have a lot of things that are holding us hostage. There are a lot of things that are not working on our continent. So the question is, if we are bound by these things, how then do we capture these opportunities? We may be able to identify them. But how do we move from identifying the opportunity to then capturing it when we ourselves seem to be captives of a system that is designed to keep us where we are? And it dawned on me that there is something that we need to tackle as African entrepreneurs. And this is the concept of freedom. So today I'm going to share with you on a topic that I have called the freedom ladder, the journey to becoming an unstoppable builder. Regardless of your circumstances, regardless of where you are coming from, regardless of your situation, anyone, anywhere in this world has the capacity to free themselves from whatever is holding them and move from the point where they can see opportunities and feel confident in their capabilities that they can actually capture these opportunities. I believe the concept of freedom is a complicated concept. But I want to simplify it by saying freedom is not the absence of obstacles. It is the progressive restoration of the builder's capacity to fulfill God's purpose. And I believe freedom is the key to living in the fullness of God's will for our lives. That is why when we read the Bible, the first recorded teaching of Jesus is centered on freedom. After coming back from the wilderness and after preaching everywhere, he then got into the temple. And when he was preaching, he opened the book of Isaiah and read where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the captives and the recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Suppose someone gets an extraordinary vision because they have climbed the vision ladder. Suppose they could see opportunities that nobody else could see. Would that alone guarantee that they become a successful entrepreneur? A successful entrepreneur is one who in the Next Africa community we call a builder. I don't think so. I don't think everybody who is going to see an opportunity is going to build something out of that opportunity, is going to make something out of that opportunity. Because a lot of people are not capturing opportunities, like I said before, because they are not yet free. Why are they not free? They have a lot of things that they believe that they need. But before an entrepreneur needs capital, they need freedom. Before they need investors, they need freedom. Before they need markets, they need freedom. Freedom is the environment in which an entrepreneur can flourish. You need the freedom to explore every opportunity that you see. Now, what does it actually mean to be free? And I want us to think about that carefully. If I asked everybody in this room to write down the definition of freedom, I would get many responses from you. To many, freedom is doing what they want. To others, it's having money. To others, it's owning a business, being able to work for themselves. Others would say freedom is going to another country because they feel the country that they are in is not giving them enough room to explore the opportunities that they want to explore. So you find that others are defining freedom politically, others are defining it economically, others are defining it spiritually. None of these definitions or identifications of freedom are entirely wrong. They are partially true. But I don't think that they go deep enough, because if you think freedom is money, there are a lot of wealthy people who are still imprisoned by fear. There are successful entrepreneurs who are suffering because of anxiety and depression today, but they have billions in their account. Entire nations are politically independent, but they are economically dependent on other countries in this world. So, perhaps freedom is something much deeper than circumstances. It cannot be defined by the things that you can touch or that you can point at. Inasmuch as it is an external manifestation of certain realities within the environment that you are, I personally believe that freedom starts somewhere. It starts inside of you. I believe freedom is an internal condition before it becomes an external reality. I'm going to ask you a question. The question is, what is Africa's greatest problem? Immediately when I ask that question, we begin to think about corruption, we begin to think about debt, we begin to think about weak institutions, colonialism and neo-colonialism. We begin to think about poor leadership, limited capital, youth unemployment. And every one of these answers contains some truth. But I want to suggest something different today. I believe those are not our deepest problem. I believe they are expressions of a deeper reality. Our greatest challenge is that our capacity to build has been progressively constrained. Think about it. If you prevent builders from building, what happens? Innovation slows. Businesses disappear. Jobs disappear. Hope disappears. Communities stagnate. Nations decline. And civilizations stop advancing. Why? Because everything in this world depends on builders remaining free enough to build. That is the reason why Jesus' first public sermon fascinates me. Because he could have announced anything. He could have spoken about heaven. He could have spoken about miracles. He could have spoken about judgment. Instead, he announced freedom. But something in that scripture intrigued me. Because Jesus did not simply say, I have come to set people free. He described two conditions that sound like the same thing. He spoke about captivity and he spoke about oppression. To free the captives, to free those who are oppressed. Why? Because these are not the same thing. A captive cannot move. They are constrained because they are captured. Okay? If someone is captured, they are either handcuffed or in leg irons or imprisoned in a constricted space. But an oppressed person can actually be free enough to go wherever they want. But they still cannot flourish. Two different conditions, one devastating outcome. Each one prevents people from fulfilling their purpose. This is why freedom matters. Not because freedom itself is the goal, but because freedom restores people to their purpose. I want us to think back to Genesis for a moment. What was God's very first assignment for humanity? He said, fill the earth, subdue it, and exercise dominion. In other words, build, create, develop, organize, and steward the resources that I have given you. Which means if the enemy wanted to frustrate God's purpose, he would attack our ability to build. He would attack our imagination, our confidence, our responsibility, our courage, our creativity, our freedom. I believe this is exactly what has happened throughout human history, if we look back. Because there's something that has puzzled me for years. Why is it that two people can grow up in the same country, under the same government, attend the same schools, experience the same economy, and yet one builds extraordinary enterprises while the other one remains trapped in their circumstances? Same conditions, two different people, two different outcomes. How is that possible? Because if environment alone determined our future, everyone living in the same environment would achieve the same outcome. But they don't. And I want you to indulge me for a moment. Do not misunderstand me. I'm not saying environment doesn't matter. Environment does matter. History matters. Governance matters. Institutions do matter. But they do not tell the whole story. There is something else, something deeper, something that explains why some people begin climbing while others remain standing still. That question stayed with me for a very long time until one day I realized something. That freedom is not a destination, but it is a ladder that you can climb. One step at a time, one decision at a time, one discipline at a time. And suddenly everything began making sense. The difference between people who are in the same conditions but exhibiting different outcomes is because these people are standing on different rungs on the same ladder. Some are halfway up, some are changing industries, some are changing nations. Not because they were born different, but because they kept climbing. So the outcomes that we are getting are entirely dependent on where one is on the freedom ladder. And this is a ladder that in Africa we have not yet understood. And that's the reason why I want to leave you all today with something that is very practical. Not merely inspiration, a ladder. A ladder that you can actually climb. Just as I believe that every entrepreneur must learn to climb the vision ladder, I now believe that every builder must also climb the freedom ladder. 8 stages to becoming an unstoppable builder. Now, before we climb the first rung on this ladder, I want to ask one final question. Imagine I give you keys to a prison. Every gate was opened, every chain removed, every door unlocked. Would every prisoner walk out? The answer is no. Why? Because some prisons are built with walls, while others are built with beliefs. And that is where our journey begins, with the first rung on the freedom ladder. It is not wealth, it is not power, it is not influence. The first rung is recognition. Recognition is where every endeavor to find freedom begins, and it begins with one question: what is binding me? What is imprisoning me? What is keeping me in captivity? Now, I want to tell you something that may surprise you. I don't think that most people fail because they lack ability. I think most people fail because they misdiagnose their problem. If you are not able to recognize the circumstances that you are actually living in and making a proper diagnosis of those circumstances and that situation, you are not going to find a lasting solution to the situation that you are in. Imagine if you walk into a hospital with severe chest pain, and the doctor examines you for a few moments. And then he comes and says, don't worry, you are just tired, and he sends you back home with just some painkillers. And a week later, you suffer a heart attack. Is the problem that the painkillers that you were given didn't work? No. The problem is that your condition was misdiagnosed. One of the greatest tragedies in this life is to correctly solve the wrong problem. That is why every entrepreneur must first become a diagnostician of their circumstances. Because before you ask, how do I become successful? It's important that you actually ask, what is preventing me from becoming successful? Because when you answer that question, you will then be able to find the how part. So the what is more important than the how, because the what is what frees you to explore the how. These are two different questions. One is searching for opportunity. How do I become successful? And the answer to that lies in the vision ladder. The second question, what is actually preventing me from becoming successful? It's searching for something much deeper. It's searching for truth. Because freedom always begins with truth. Jesus says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. But unfortunately, sometimes truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes truth exposes us. Sometimes truth dismantled excuses we have carried for years. But without truth, there can be no freedom. I know this seems all abstract, so I want to make this practical. When I ask, what is binding you? What do you look at? Most people immediately begin to go and look outside themselves. Government, economy, banking systems. I have no money, no investors to come. My boss is not paying me. My family is troubling me. My education, I need to get more education because I don't have an education that can put me into the economy as an employee. But I want to say something very clearly this afternoon. Some of those things are genuine obstacles. We should never pretend that they don't exist, because they are real in our lives. And if you are African, our continent of Africa has inherited real structural challenges that many of our entrepreneurs struggle to flourish within our continent. We have no access to affordable capital. We operate in unpredictable policy environments. We compete in global markets where the rules were written long before we arrived. Those realities are real, and we should study them, understand them, and work to improve them. But here is the mistake that we often make. We stop there. We become experts at diagnosing the world while remaining strangers to ourselves. We have all met someone who could explain every problem in the country. Most of us do that. But we cannot explain why we never finish what we start. We understand geopolitics, but we don't understand our own habits. Most people can analyze the global economy, but they cannot manage their own finances. Everyone is an expert at why Africa struggles, but we don't know why we procrastinate. It's a dangerous way to live, because external awareness without self-awareness produces powerless people. Builders must learn to diagnose both their external circumstances, but also must be enlightened on their internal realities. And to do that, builders must ask two questions. What needs to change around me? And the second question is an equally important question. What needs to change within me? And these two questions must always be asked together. Because I've come to believe that there are two kinds of chains that keep us where we are. The first are the chains that are placed on us. And the second are the chains we continue carrying long after someone has unlocked them. When an elephant is young, it can be restrained with a simple rope. Okay? You take a rope, you put it on a peg, you tie a young elephant there. It will pull, it will struggle, and it will fail. Eventually, when it fails to free itself, it stops trying. If you do this for the rest of its life using the same peg and the same cord that you were using, even if the elephant grows big and is now powerful enough to uproot a tree, when you as a trainer uses that same cord, that same rope, it will feel trapped. Not because the rope is strong, but because the memory is. The elephant is no longer restrained by the rope, it is restrained by what it believes about the rope. Now think about it. We're exactly living like that. How many of us have accepted invisible limits and perfected excuses? Excuses such as people like me don't build large businesses. I don't come from money. I don't have the right connections. Africa is too difficult. I'm too old. I'm too young. None of these statements are chains made of iron. They're chains made of belief. And sometimes these chains are stronger than iron. That is why, to properly recognize the things that are keeping you where you are, you need to have humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is seeing yourself truthfully, seeing your strengths and limitations honestly, not exaggerating them, not denying them, just seeing clearly. Because once you can see clearly, you can begin climbing. Now I want you to do something. Today, not tomorrow. I want you to do something right now. Imagine that your life is divided into 6 areas. And these are the areas. Number 1, your spiritual life. Number 2, your thinking. Number 3, your relationships. Number 4, your finances. Number 5, your work. Number 6, your character. Now I want you to ask yourself one question in each area. What is my biggest chain? In your spiritual life, what is your biggest chain? In your thinking, what is your biggest chain? In your relationships, what is your biggest chain? In your finances, what is your biggest chain? In your work, what is your biggest chain? In your character, what is your biggest chain? This is not a question that we answer quickly, because we need to think carefully. Because your biggest chain is often hiding in the place you have stopped examining. Some of you will discover that your chain isn't money, it's inconsistency. Some will discover that it's not capital, it is fear. Some will discover it's not a lack of opportunity. It is that you are just comfortable where you are. Most will discover that it's not the government that's holding them back. It is discipline. Recognition is the courage to tell yourself the truth. And here's the beautiful thing about this. The moment that you can name the chain, it begins to lose its power. Darkness disappeared the moment you turn on the light. You don't fight darkness. You illuminate it. And that is the same way that truth works. The reason why Jesus spoke so much about truth is because truth exposes what has been hiding in the shadows. And once something has been exposed, it can be confronted. So we need to hold a light to the dark places in our lives, places that we have trained ourselves to ignore. But there is a danger here, a very serious danger. Recognizing your problems is the beginning. But some people spend all their lives recognizing problems. They recognize problems with themselves, in themselves, and they also recognize problems in their environment. When they recognize problems in themselves, they start to feel sorry for themselves. When they recognize problems outside themselves, they become critics. They become analysts. They become commentators. They can explain everything that is wrong, yet they never move. They will not go anywhere. Inasmuch as recognition is the first rung on this ladder, if you stay here long enough, for too long, you risk becoming a cynic. You begin to believe that because you can explain every problem, you have solved it. You haven't. You have only found the starting point. So the question becomes, how do we move from recognition to the next rung on this ladder? We need to build a bridge that moves us from the first rung to the second rung. And this is a bridge that every builder must cross. That bridge is hope. Because the moment that you recognize your chains, one of two things will happen. Either you will conclude that nothing can change, or you will say that this is not where your story ends. The second response is hope. And hope is what carries every entrepreneur from recognition to awakening. I want to ask you another question related to one that I've asked before. Have you ever met someone who could describe every problem in their life, yet they remained exactly where they were 5 years later? Someone who will tell you that I am not able to move or to change anything in my life because of my marriage. They will tell you that for 10 years. And they may even die before they do anything about it. Some will tell you that I cannot do anything because of the economy. Meet them 10 years after, you will find them in the same economy doing the same thing. Now they are experts in their situation. They can explain the economy, they can explain the politics, they can explain corruption, they know where it's coming from, they can explain the challenges in their family, they can explain the challenges with their spouse, they can explain the challenges in their place of employment. They will tell you every reason why their life has not worked, because they've become excellent diagnosticians, but in it all, they are still terrible builders. Why? Because recognition, like I said, changes nothing. You can recognize every chain and still remain chained. You can recognize every weakness and still remain weak. Recognition is only valuable if it produces hope. And I know hope is a word that we use very casually. People have a tendency to say, I hope things will improve, I hope to get a job, I hope the business will pick up. Hope is not wishing. The Bible says, hope is confidence that tomorrow does not look like today. It is the refusal to believe that your current reality is your permanent reality. That is why hope is so powerful. Because without hope, people stop trying. Two people can face the same challenge, exact challenge. One gives up, while the other keeps fighting. The difference is rarely intelligence or money, it is hope. Hope will keep the builder moving while everyone else sits down. And that is why Jeremiah could write these words while Israel was in exile. For I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Wherever God saved his people, he did not wait until they were free to give them hope. Hope always comes before freedom. That is God's order. Because hope is the bridge that carries us to the next rung. Why? Because once hope is born, something changes inside of you. You stop saying, this is just how life is, and instead you begin asking, can life be different? And I want to ask you this question today. Can life be different? Can your circumstances be different? Can your situation be different? Because when you begin to ask that question, it changes us. Because it leads us to the second rung on the freedom ladder, which is awakening. The first rung is recognition. The second rung on this ladder is awakening. Awakening begins when you ask, Must it remain this way? Must my life remain this way? Must my situation remain this way? Where recognition asks, what is binding me? Awakening asks, must I remain bound? These are completely different questions. One identifies reality, the other challenges that reality. History changes when enough people begin asking that same question. Think about Moses. For 40 years he lived in Pharaoh's palace. Then for 40 years he lived in Midian. And one day, standing in front of a burning bush, God speaks to him. And what does God say? I have seen the suffering of my people. I have heard their cry. And I have come down to deliver them. Now, what brought about the freedom of the children of Israel is not that all of them at one point they had hope. No. Most of them were still gripped by fear. If you read your Bible, you will see that they resisted Moses so much when he tried to free them. But something had changed in Moses. That encounter with God had given him hope. It had awakened him. So before a nation changes, before a community changes, before a country changes, before a continent changes, someone awakens. Before a business is built, someone awakens. Every transformation on this earth begins in the heart of one person who refuses to accept that things must remain the way they are. That is awakening. There are people who complain every day, and yet they never change anything. Then there are others who face the exact same circumstances, but eventually they build something extraordinary because of their experiences. The difference between these two is that the second person reached a point where complaining was no longer enough. And they said, there has to be another way. Something must give. There has to be another way. There has to be another way. That sentence alone has started more businesses than almost any other. There has to be another way. So when you find something that's giving you discomfort, there has to be another way. Every innovation begins there. Every invention begins there. Every movement begins there. Every revival begins there. The people who build meaningful things in this life are people who become dissatisfied with accepting their reality as permanent. I want to be careful here, because awakening, in as much as it is important, it is not denying reality. As entrepreneurs, we must never pretend that the problems don't exist. Hope does not come by pretending. Faith does not come by pretending. It is not pretending. Optimism is not pretending. Builders simply refuse to believe that today's reality is tomorrow's destiny. And that is very different. When Nehemiah stood before the broken walls of Jerusalem, he didn't say the walls are not broken, because they were broken. That was the reality. He simply refused to believe that they had to stay broken. When David stood before Goliath, he didn't pretend Goliath wasn't a giant. You could see he was a giant. What David simply refused to do is accepting his situation by believing that Goliath was unbeatable. As entrepreneurs, as builders, we don't deny facts. Because facts look us straight in the face. What we can do is challenge the conclusions. Where in your life have you quietly accepted something that God never intended you to accept? Have you accepted being average? Have you accepted being perpetually in debt? Have you accepted being fearful? Living in mediocrity? Maybe you have accepted that your business will never grow. And maybe you have accepted that because you are African, certain things are impossible. The question is, who told you that? Who convinced you that your future has already been decided? Awakening begins the moment you challenge those assumptions, the moment you stop saying, this is just who I am, and begin saying that perhaps I was created for more. That is awakening. But awakening on its own is still not enough. Because excitement without truth can become dangerous. I said before that hope needs direction. Awakening, on the other hand, needs a foundation. And to build that foundation that awakening needs, we have to find another bridge that leads us to the next rank. And that bridge is called truth. Like I said, awakening gives you hope. Hope is a beautiful thing. But by itself, it can also be dangerous. Because hope without truth becomes wishful thinking. We've all met people who are full of hope. They'll tell you, this is my year. They'll tell you, this business is going to succeed. They'll tell you, this year things are going to change. And then you ask what question? What is your plan that will lead you from this situation and get you to that situation? When you ask that question, what usually follows is silence. Jesus didn't say hope shall make you free. He said you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free. Think about that. Truth is not merely information. It is seeing reality as God sees it. And one of the greatest truths every entrepreneur must learn is this, that your environment influences you, but it does not define you. Your environment influences you, but it does not define you. And I'll say that again. Your environment influences you, but it does not define you. That one sentence changed my thinking. For years, we've been told that Africa cannot build because of its environment. But history tells a different story. Joseph built in Egypt as a foreigner. Daniel built in Babylon. Esther influenced Persia. As entrepreneurs, we don't fight against the conditions. We build in the conditions. Because what we are building is an internal manifestation of our beliefs, an expression of what is inside of us. Paul built churches throughout the Roman Empire. Spreading what was known to be a Jewish religion in a colonized world. None of these people waited for perfect conditions. None of them said, when the system changes, then I will start building. They understood a deeper truth. We don't wait for ideal environments. We are at the beginning of better environments. That is the calling of an entrepreneur. That is the calling of a builder. And it is that truth that carries us to the next rank. Because once truth enters your mind, something begins to change. Not around you, but within you. And you get to the third rung on the freedom ladder. And it's renewal. Renewal asks one question: which chains in my life still exist only because I still believe them? Now, this is what I believe to be the most important battle of all in our pursuit of freedom. It's the battle of the mind. The battle of what's in our own heads. I'm going to ask you a question. Where did building begin? It doesn't start as a plan. Before the architect draws the first line, before the engineer calculates the first measurement, before the builder lays the first brick, building begins in the mind. Every enterprise that we see, every movement, every civilization began as an idea. If you can imprison a person's thinking, you never have to imprison their body. That is why every oppressive system eventually attacks the mind. Every form of subjugation targets the mind. Slavery attacked the mind. Colonialism did not occupy land, it occupied imagination. It taught generations of people who should lead, who should innovate, who should manufacture, who should define excellence. And unfortunately for all of us here in Africa, most of those people did not look like us. And eventually, many Africans began believing those lies. And you hear it in what they say. If only this type of people came back, then our countries would develop. Why? Because this is the tragedy. The flags came down, the borders changed, governments changed, but some minds never did. The prison disappeared, but the prisoner's thinking remained. Now, I don't want to make this about Africa, because this is about you and me. How many ideas have you not built on because you believed you are not good enough? How many ideas, inventions have died inside people because they believed someone else is already doing it? These are not economic problems. Those are mental prisons. And unless those prisons are broken, nothing changes. The Apostle Paul understood this. He said, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformed by the renewing of your mind. He doesn't begin with your bank account. He doesn't begin with your career. He actually refuses to accept the role of your circumstances in that renewal process. He begins with the mind, because transformation is always an inside-out process. The world tells us if you change your circumstances, your life will change. This is what we have been told. If you change your circumstances, then your life will change. But God says, if you renew your mind, your life will follow. If you change your thinking, you change your life. Now, that is a completely different philosophy. And to expose that, I'm going to ask you a very uncomfortable question. What is the biggest lie you have believed about yourself? You. Think carefully. Not about your neighbor. Not about Africa. But about you. Perhaps it's that I'm not a leader. I'm not creative. I'm not good with money. Business isn't for people like me. I will never build anything significant. Who told you that? Was it God? Was it experience? Was it disappointment? You tried so many times and you kept failing. And eventually, you came to a place where you started believing this lie. As entrepreneurs, as builders, we must become ruthless with lies. And every lie that weakens your calling must be confronted. Every lie that diminishes your purpose must be rejected. Every lie that tells you your future has already been decided must be replaced with the truth. Disciplined truth. Renewal is not positive thinking. It is disciplined truth. Disciplined truth. Two entrepreneurs will lose everything. The first one will say, I have failed. The second one will say, my business has failed. Where is the difference? One has made failure a part of their identity. The other has recognized it as an event. What happened may be the same, but the difference between how these two people respond is their mindset. A person who owns the failure remains trapped. But the person who understands that failure was an event immediately begins rebuilding. And that is the power of renewal. If recognition teaches you to diagnose the situation, and awakening teaches you to hold on to hope that this situation will change. Renewal polishes that thinking process by fitting new software in your head to believe in possibilities. And eventually, every entrepreneur who thinks differently will eventually live differently. But like everything else, there's a point of caution. Many people stop here. They read books, they listen to podcasts, they attend conferences in a bid to renew their thinking. And yet their lives never change. Why? Because a renewed mind must eventually become a prepared life. And that is where we cross another bridge that leads us to the fourth rank. And this bridge is responsibility. The moment you begin thinking differently, you will no longer be able to blame anyone else for your situation. When you wake up and you tell yourself, I'm responsible for my life, I'm responsible for my situation, and I'm responsible for the actions that I will take, and I'm responsible for the future that's ahead of me, you can't blame anyone else. And that is why, as entrepreneurs, we must ask one question that changes us forever. To build this future, to build this company, to build this business, to find a solution to this problem, who must I become? And that is the question that takes us to the fourth rung on this ladder: preparation. You will never be free if you do not prepare yourself for the future that you want. When you change your mind and begin asking, what is my responsibility, instead of asking, who is responsible for my life, something remarkable happens in your life. There are two completely different questions. One keeps you looking outwards, the other helps you focus inwards. When you ask, who is responsible for my life, you become a perpetual victim. When you ask, what is my responsibility, you become a builder. there's a point of caution here. When I'm talking about responsibility and you accepting responsibility for a situation, I'm not saying look at yourself and say every circumstance in your life you're the one who caused it. No. There are things that genuinely happened to you. Responsibility that I'm talking about here does not pertain to the past. Yes, in some people it might reference things that they have actually done, mistakes they have made. But there are things that are happening to you genuinely because certain things in your environment have affected you. But in as much as you may not be responsible for where you are responsible for how you are going to get out of there. Joseph was not responsible for being sold into slavery. He was actually helping out, taking food to his brothers. And then they sold him. He did nothing. You understand? Daniel was not responsible for being taken to Babylon. Nehemiah was not responsible for the broken walls of Jerusalem. And Jesus was not responsible for the sins of humanity. But what connects these people is the fact that they accepted responsibility for what they would do next. That is the difference. As an entrepreneur, you must never confuse causation with responsibility. You may not be responsible for where you started, but you are responsible for how you respond. You are responsible for where you end up. And on this journey, somewhere on this journey, every entrepreneur must stop asking, if only. Saying, if only I had more money, I would do this. If only I had the right connections, I would do this. If only I was born somewhere else, I would be an entrepreneur. I would have a big business. I would have more opportunities. If only my parents had money. If only the government changed. The people who build replace if only with what now? That is the question that changes lives. Because once you accept responsibility, you recover urgency. And urgency is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us. He created us not merely to react to the things that are happening in this world, but to shape them, to subdue the earth, to exercise dominion. It is part of everyone's purpose to subdue your environment and to exercise dominion in your environment. Every one of us must do that. So whenever you feel trapped in the situation that you are in, know that you have a duty to turn around that situation. Not only to get out of this situation, but to subdue it such that no one else coming from similar circumstances as you are coming from will have to face the things that you are facing. And that realization brings us to rank number 4. Preparation. Who must I become? Who must I become? The world has perpetuated one of the greatest misconceptions about success. Many entrepreneurs would tell you that I became successful because I was lucky. Listen to the many interviews of the billionaires. They will tell you that luck was a part of it. They were in the right place at the right time. They met the right person. They received the right opportunity. I don't discredit all that. There is some truth in it. Opportunity matters. Timing matters. Relationships, yes, they do matter. But there's something that is much more important that matters. And that's preparation. If I give two people the same opportunity right now, and one of them succeed, the reason is usually because one of them was prepared. Opportunity does not create greatness. Opportunity reveals preparation. I often say that opportunity is an amplifier that magnifies whatever is already inside of you. If you are prepared, opportunity accelerates you. If you are unprepared, opportunity exposes you. When people look at the life of Joseph, they usually remember the palace and they forget the prison. But even before the prison, they forget Potiphar's house. Joseph did not become an excellent administrator when Pharaoh promoted him. He was an excellent administrator in Potiphar's house. And that is actually what brought him the problems that led him to the prison. Joseph was already excellent. The promotion that Pharaoh gave him simply revealed what preparation had already produced. David did not become courageous when he faced Goliath. He had already fought lions. He had already fought bears. David learned faithfulness when nobody was watching. Look at Jesus. 3 years of ministry. 30 years of preparation. God has always been more interested in preparing people than promoting them. Because promotion without preparation destroys people. Preparation protects purpose. And I want to ask you this. If that opportunity that you have been praying for arrives tomorrow, would you be ready? I want you to think about that. If that thing that you wish you had, that thing that you have been fasting for, if it's money to put in your business, if it's a marriage, are you prepared? That investor that you have been asking for, if they called you tomorrow, are your books in order? If they want to do their due diligence, are your books in order? Is your business model clear? Are your numbers making sense? your own character as a person? Is it a character that sustains growth? Most of us are praying for opportunities that our current level of preparation cannot sustain. When you answer that question honestly, it changes your thinking. It changed my own thinking. Because it made me realize that while I was praying for open doors, God was preparing me to walk through them. And I want to say this to you today. Perhaps God is not delaying your future. Perhaps He's developing your capacity. Preparation changes the question that people ask, when will my life change? Because those who build who eventually ask, who must I become? Notice the difference. One person focuses on circumstances, the second focuses on character. The first question waits, the second grows. When will my life change depends on the future. Who must I become begins today. So what does preparation actually look like? It looks like reading when nobody's watching. It looks like learning skills before anyone pays you for them. It looks like becoming financially disciplined before wealth arrives. It looks like developing integrity before influence arrives. It looks like strengthening your leadership skills before anyone can call you a leader. Preparation is choosing today's discipline over today's comfort because you believe in tomorrow's calling. And this is where most entrepreneurs lose the race. They want visible success without visible preparation. But God does not work that way. He develops roots before He grows fruits. And here is a point of reflection. Think about your own life. What is that one capability that if you developed it over the next 12 months would completely change your future? Is it a skill that you can learn? Communication, financial management, sales, leadership, technology, strategic thinking, negotiation? Which one is it? Because preparation is never random. Builders prepare intentionally. If you're a boxer and you train by running, are you going to win? You can't become good at everything. But you need to become exceptional at those things that your calling requires. And this is the beautiful thing about it. Preparation gives you confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. Because confidence is not believing that you can do everything. Confidence is knowing you have done the work to function in your calling. That's the reason why prepared people walk into opportunities differently. They don't rely on luck. They rely on disciplined growth. But with everything, there is another danger here. Some people spend all their lives preparing. They take another course. They go for another degree. just one other seminar, another certificate, another year. And the one thing that was supposed to prepare them becomes something totally different. Preparation becomes procrastination dressed in respectable clothes. Eventually, no matter how much you need to prepare, a time will come when you need to start building. All that preparation must give birth to action. And to move from preparation to action, there is a bridge that needs to be crossed. And that bridge is courage. Courage is what enables prepared people to act. It's one thing to become capable, but it's another thing to step into the arena. And in the arena, that is where true entrepreneurship begins. For an entrepreneur, what lies on the other side of courage is creation. You are at a point where you know enough. You have learned enough. You have attended enough seminars. You have read enough books. You have refined that business plan. You have written and rewritten that proposal. You have improved the logo. You have perfected the presentation. And yet, nothing has been built. Why? Because there is a bridge between preparation and creation that you are yet to cross. You need the courage to move from preparation to creation. I used to believe that courage meant not being afraid. I don't believe that anymore. I think courage is acting despite fear, because fear never completely disappears. Every entrepreneur feels it. Every leader feels it. Every pioneer feels it. The difference between those who do things and those who don't is not the absence of fear. The difference is the decision to move in spite of that fear. God did not tell Joshua that one day you will stop feeling afraid and then you will do my will. He said, be strong and courageous. Why? Because it's a choice to be strong. It's a choice to be courageous. Are you understanding this? Fear is a feeling. God never commands feelings. He commands decisions. He commands choices, things that you can change. So if courage is a choice, it means that it is available to every one of us. Not because fear disappears, but because purpose becomes greater than the fear. Now think about every great entrepreneur that you admire. Do you think they were not afraid? Of course they were. Imagine hiring the first employee and you don't know where their salary is coming from. Imagine getting a loan and you're not sure if your cash flow is going to support the repayment of that loan. Imagine what stands between the launch of a product and getting the first customer. Think about the rejection. That first public failure. Everyone who did anything great, they feel exactly what you feel. The difference is they crossed that bridge. They acted. Builders are not fearless people. They are people who refuse to let that fear control them. By making a conscious decision to move forward in spite of that fear. And that is courage. When you master that courage, you move to the fifth rung on the ladder. You move to the stage of creation. Freedom does not come if you don't conquer your fears. But conquering your fears is just one thing. Once you have conquered that fear, you need to actually create that future that you want. Creation begins when you ask yourself, what can I build with what I already have? Ladies and gentlemen, this is where entrepreneurship begins. Making that decision, asking that question, what can I build with what I already have? Not with what somebody else will give you, with what you have. That question begins entrepreneurship. That question separates entrepreneurs from every other person. This is where builders are born. Entrepreneurship does not begin when you register a company. It does not begin when you receive funding. It does not begin when you hire employees. It begins the moment you stop asking, what do I need, and start asking, what can I build? That is that question that changes everything. A lot of us are waiting for capital, waiting for government, waiting for investors, waiting for permission, waiting for perfect conditions. But as builders, as entrepreneurs, we must think differently. Those who build begin with what they already have. This is the way of God. When Moses stood before the Red Sea, God didn't ask Moses, what do you wish you had? He asked, what is in your hand? Moses' response, a staff. Just a staff. A rod. Common, ordinary rod. Yet in the hands of someone willing to obey God, it became extraordinary. The same happened with David. Saul tried to give him his armor to go and face Goliath. David removed it, threw it away. What did he get? A sling and a stone. Ordinary things. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he didn't begin with abundance. He began with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Ordinary things. When Elijah visited the widow, he didn't ask what she lacked. What did he ask? What remained? A little oil, a little flour. Are you understanding this? Do you see the pattern here? Because I'm going to ask you a question. What remains? For everything that you have lost, what remains? For all things that you look at and you say, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have that, what do you have? Because from that which you have, you will build a better future. God uses what you already have. The miracle always comes after stewardship. And stewardship is the ability to recognize everything that we have been given. You understand this? When you forget what you have closed the door that will lead you to what you will become. Freedom demands that you take an inventory of your life. Because most of the prayers that entrepreneurs are praying are actually wrong. Lord, can you give me more? Can you give me this? Perhaps God wants to know what you have done with what He has already given you. And this is why two people with exactly the same resources, same education, same amount of money, same contacts would produce different outcomes. Because the enterprises are not built by resources that are coming externally. They're built by what is inside of you. Resources do not create companies. It is people who get those resources who create companies. The resource that changes the world is not money. And this is interesting. Money is a tool. It can make the world better, it can make it worse. This is the case of Africa. We have minerals the whole world needs. Okay? But we are still in this situation. The abundance of minerals has failed to change our situation. Why? Because money does not change the world. Creativity changes the world. Money is a tool that amplifies creativity. Money can never replace creativity. This is why the poorest communities in history have sometimes produced extraordinary entrepreneurs. Because entrepreneurship is not born from abundance. It is born from seeing possibilities where others see limitations. And this is one of the reasons I believe Africa has an extraordinary future. People often describe our continent in terms of what we lack. But I prefer asking another question. What does Africa possess that the world is underestimated? By 2050, 2.5 billion people, the majority of them young people, creative people, people who have seen every hardship on this continent, but they are still standing. Resilient people people who have built solutions out of nothing just to survive. Resourceful people. Our communities here in Africa are solving problems every day with limited resources. Imagine what will happen when those people begin thinking like builders instead of survivors. We have been so attuned to survival to the point where we feel that this is all there is. Imagine if that changes. What will happen? Everything changes. And that is all a business really is. A business is a solution that has become organized. Every enterprise that you see exists because someone solved a problem. I want you to think about the businesses that you admire. Some solved transportation, some solved communication, some solved healthcare issues, some solved education problems, some solved food production, some solved payments. Why? Because the entrepreneur asks one question over and over again. Whose life becomes better because I exist? That question is the birthplace of enterprise. Because if no one changes because of your solution, you have not created value. But if people's lives improve because of something that you build, you have entered the work of creation. Now, here's something that I have noticed. Many people stop before they create because they fear imperfection. What if that thing that I'm building is not enough? They want the first product to be perfect. They want the first presentation to be perfect. The first business to be perfect. But creation does not begin with perfection, it begins with progress. When God created the earth in Genesis 1, we are told, and the earth was without form, and darkness hovered over the face of the deep. Creation doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with progress. The first version of whatever product you're going to build is never going to be the best version of it. And it should not be. Because builders improve by building, not by endlessly preparing. At some point, you must put your work into the world, and that way, you will learn, you will adapt, you will improve, and then you will create again. And that is the rhythm of entrepreneurship. It's a cyclical process. Are you getting this? What are you waiting for? Seriously. If I ask you, what are you waiting for? If I came back 1 year from today, what would have to happen for you to say, I'm glad I started? Are you going to finally write that book? Are you going to launch that business? Are you going to open that practice? Are you going to build that software? Will you train that team? What is it that's stopping you? Because everything that you say you will do later, you're almost always never going to do it. True builders understand that action creates momentum, not the other way around. But here, there's a lesson that we must learn. Creating value is powerful. But if you never learn to keep, multiply, and steward that value, you remain trapped. Many people create wealth, but very few people build lasting ownership. And this has been one of Africa's biggest struggles. And if we are to find freedom collectively as a continent and as nations and individually as a people, we need to cross another bridge. And that bridge is called stewardship. Stewardship teaches us that creating something is only the beginning. Builders are not only creators, they are faithful custodians of what they create. When we understand stewardship, we move to the 6th rung on the freedom ladder. Which is ownership. One of the greatest misconceptions about entrepreneurship is that success belongs to the person with the best idea. I don't believe that. You know why? Because history is full of brilliant ideas that disappeared. But it is also equally full of ideas that looked ordinary on the surface, but became extraordinary enterprises. Look at Oreo, a burnt biscuit. Burnt biscuit. But it has taken over the world. And it's spawning imitations everywhere. The difference in success is rarely the idea. The difference is usually stewardship. And many will ask, what is stewardship? And if I reflect that question back to you, what would you say it is? Many automatically will think about money. But stewardship is bigger than money. It is the faithful management of everything that God places in your hands. Everything. When you tell someone to steward resources, the first thing they're thinking of is money. And I think this has happened because stewardship has usually been taught from the parable of talents. And everyone has sort of understood talents to be money. Everything in your hands. Your time, your knowledge, your relationships, your opportunities, your influence, your finances, your gifts, your business. The entrepreneur who cannot steward a little should not expect to steward much. That's why I asked, what is in your hand? When you identify what you already have, and it ceases to be just that thing, just a little oil, just a staff. It is only then that you begin to build greater things. Jesus taught this principle repeatedly. Whoever is faithful with little will also be faithful with much. Whoever is faithful with little will also be faithful with much. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say whoever dreams big or whoever wants more. He said whoever is faithful. Faithfulness is what turns creators into owners. Many people create, very few people steward. My idea was stolen from me. No, it wasn't. You failed stewardship. My company was taken from me. No, it was not taken. You were not a good steward. That is why stewardship is a bridge to ownership. And ownership is the sixth rung on the freedom ladder. How do I reduce dependence and build lasting freedom? Ladies and gentlemen, this is where freedom begins to change form. This is where we begin to talk about remaining free. Everything else that I have shared before, I was talking about becoming free. Ownership concerns remaining free. There's a difference between becoming free and remaining free. To some people, freedom is something they experience. How do I reduce dependence and build lasting freedom? This is where freedom begins to change form. Ownership is where we begin to talk about remaining free. I've been talking about becoming free. Becoming free and remaining free are two different things. To some people, freedom is an experience. To others, freedom is a lived reality. Most people experience freedom. Very few people sustain it. Ownership is one of the ways freedom becomes permanent in your life. Now, when I say ownership, I am not simply talking about owning things. I'm talking about owning productive capacity. Because there is a difference between possession and ownership. In Africa, we tend to confuse these two. A luxury car is a possession. A business that generates value is productive ownership. Expensive clothes are possessions. Intellectual property is ownership. A large television is a possession. A patent is ownership, productive ownership. Consumption makes us feel successful. And because of consumption, people look around them and say, that person is successful. Because they can notice the consumption. But if we understand ownership, we become resilient. No matter what changes in the environment, we will not lose what we have. And builders are entrepreneurs who have gotten to a place where they understand this difference. I want us to go back and think about Africa again for a moment. Because one of the greatest challenges facing our continent is not simply that we don't create value. It is actually that we do not retain enough of the value that we create. We export raw materials, others refine them. We produce ideas, others commercialize them. We educate talented people. And then we push those people away, and others benefit from their productivity. That observation is not an accusation. It's not even an excuse for our situation. It's an invitation to build differently, to own more, to innovate more, to retain more value. And these same principles apply to every entrepreneur. If you spend your entire life creating value that someone else owns, your freedom will always remain fragile. Builders must become owners. And I want to make this very practical. When I say ownership, I don't mean everyone must immediately own factories. Ownership grows, just like freedom grows. And perhaps today your greatest asset is knowledge. Own it. Develop that expertise. Because nobody can take it away. To some, your greatest asset is your reputation. You need to protect that. To others, their asset are the relationships that they have. Invest in them. If you own a small business, strengthen it. Because ownership is not measured only by size, it is measured by responsibility. I often ask this question to a lot of people, entrepreneurs especially. What do you own today that you didn't own 5 years ago? Not just physically, not just mentally, professionally, commercially, spiritually. What do you own today that you didn't own 5 years ago? If the answer is nothing, then we have a stewardship problem. As entrepreneurs, we must be in the habit of intentionally accumulating productive capacity. Every year, we must become less dependent. Every year, we must become more resilient. Every year, we must become more capable of creating opportunities rather than waiting for them. That is ownership. As nations, every year, we must become less dependent. Every year, we must become more resilient. Every year, we must become more capable of creating opportunities rather than waiting for them. As a continent, every year, we must become less dependent, more resilient, and more capable of creating opportunities rather than waiting for them. That, ladies and gentlemen, is ownership. And I want to challenge you today. Many of us here dream of financial freedom. But very few of us dream of financial responsibility. Yet one produces the other. Money without stewardship disappears. Ownership without discipline collapses. History has shown us this repeatedly. Many people inherit wealth, but very few people preserve it. Why? Because ownership is sustained by character. not contracts. As a parent, you may sign a very good contract with your lawyer, you may create the best forms of trust, but that is not what will keep that inheritance. It is character. Anything that you put externally will be lost. But what you build internally, that's what you will keep. Imagine planting an orchard. First year, you see almost nothing. The second year, still very little. Third year, maybe a few pieces of fruits. If you think like a consumer, you become impatient. But if you think like an owner, you understand that planting is for decades, not days. When we begin to understand ownership in Africa, it will change the time horizons that we use to measure success. Because if we think like consumers, who want the fruits today? The gold is supposed to give us money today. The minerals are supposed to give us money today. But taking ownership will mean we'll begin to think about generations. Generations who will come after us and look at these holes in the ground. What are we going to tell them? If we tell them there was gold, they are going to ask, what became of it? If we tell them these holes are because we were mining lithium, what became of it? If we tell them that there was cobalt, what became of it? What will we point at besides those holes to those future generations to say, with that gold, we built this. With that lithium, we built this. With that job, I did this. I built you this. I worked in this company, and with the money that I got, I started this. What will you tell the generations that are coming after you? We must be a generation that creates institutions, not merely incomes. Your grandchildren, the people that are coming after you, when they talk about your life one day, what will they say you owned? What will they say you built? When people who are coming after you say, my grandfather, my grandmother built a business that employed thousands of people, built this institution that you see that is transforming communities, even after they are long gone. They created opportunities that outlived them. That is ownership at the highest level. But ownership is not the destination. Some people own enormous wealth, yet never change anything beyond themselves. Ownership without service to others becomes accumulation. But God never intended ownership to end with the owner. Ownership must eventually become influence. And that is where we find another bridge. And this bridge is called leadership. It leads us to the next rung, called influence. Leadership teaches us that what we own is not simply for ourselves, It is entrusted to us so that we might strengthen others. The greatest entrepreneurs are remembered not for what they owned, but for what they changed. Are you understanding this? There is a difference between someone who owns a business and someone who leads an industry. Those two people are different. Ownership answers what belongs to me. Leadership answers who is becoming stronger because of me. That is a profound difference. Ownership has a tendency to become selfish, but leadership never can be selfish. Leadership is not measured by what you possess. It is measured by what you reproduce. Jesus never owned a business. He never built a palace. He never commanded an army. Yet more than 2,000 years later, his influence continues to shape nations. Why? Because leadership is not about possession. Leadership is about transformation. The greatest leaders do not merely gather followers, they produce builders. And that is what makes leadership a bridge. Because everything that you have built through leadership must now begin to build others. And that is influence. The seventh rung on the freedom ladder. How do I shape my environment instead of merely surviving it? How do I shape my environment instead of merely surviving it? If Nigeria is hard, how do I shape it instead of merely surviving it? If Zimbabwe is a difficult place to build in, how do I shape it instead of merely surviving it? If Africa is a difficult place, how do I shape it instead of merely surviving it? That is influence. There must come in every entrepreneur's journey a place and a time where they stop asking, how do I survive? And begin asking, how do I improve the world around me? I want you to think about the progression we have made so far on this ladder. Recognition was about seeing the chains that are holding us. Awakening was refusing to accept them. Renewal was about changing your thinking. Preparation changed your capacity to create. And creation changed your productivity. But it led you to ownership, which changed your independence. Now we are at influence. And it is influence that changes your environment. I want you to notice this progression. Every step we have taken on this ladder, every rung we have climbed, it has been making you progressively more free. But freedom is never meant to terminate with you. Freedom must overflow, always. If you throw a stone into a lake, the stone does not simply affect the point where it lands. It sends ripples in every direction. That is how influence works. when you build a business, when you work on that idea, the business will create employment. That employment will strengthen families. Strong families will strengthen communities. And strong communities, they strengthen nations. The entrepreneur rarely sees the full impact of what they build. But that impact, ladies and gentlemen, continues long after the entrepreneur has gone home. And that is the mark of influence. And this is where I must challenge something that I think many people misunderstand. Influence is not fame. Some of the most influential people in history were never famous. A teacher who changed a student's life has influence. The entrepreneur who mentors a young founder has influence. The parent who raises a child with integrity has influence. The employer who believes in someone before they believed in themselves has influence. Influence is measured by transformation, not attention. Social media has confused us. It tells us that influence is measured by followers. But God tells us influence is measured by fruit. These two are very different. I'll go back to Joseph. Joseph never campaigned to become influential. He became excellent, and influence followed him. Daniel never chased influence. He pursued faithfulness. Influence followed him. The lesson is simple. Don't pursue influence, pursue excellence. Influence is often the consequence of excellence sustained over time. I always say, never chase things that must follow you. Never chase things that must follow you. Influence is a result of the things that you have pursued. When you pursue excellence, influence follows. Become excellent in what you do, and you'll see the results. I want to ask you this question. If every entrepreneur in this country built an ethical enterprise, what would happen to the country? If every entrepreneur paid people fairly, what would happen? If every entrepreneur mentored 5 young people, what would happen? If every entrepreneur built institutions instead of merely businesses, what would happen? Do you see what I'm talking about? Influence is how entrepreneurs become nation builders. Not because they enter politics, but because they transform societies through enterprise. That is why I have always believed that entrepreneurship is one of the highest forms of public service. A builder who creates an opportunity saves society. An entrepreneur who creates jobs saves society. An entrepreneur who solves problems saves society. Influence is simply the multiplication of service. But even influence is not the end. There is one final step. Because history remembers people not merely for the influence they had, but for the freedom they created. And that's why the final bridge that we must cross on the journey to finding freedom is love. Love. Not strategy, not power, not influence, love. Because influence without love eventually becomes domination. History is full of people, not all of them improved humanity. Influential people. Influential people who built empires that exploited. Cecil John Rhodes, very influential. What did he bring? Colonialism and exploitation. The British South Africa Company, a very big company, built solely on oppression and extraction. Success built on the backs of the suffering of many Africans. Many great entrepreneurs built institutions that enriched themselves while impoverishing others. What was missing? Love. But Jesus said, whoever wants to be great amongst you must first of all become your servant. Think about that. The greatest leader became the greatest servant. The greatest influence in this life comes through sacrificial love. Love changes the purpose of influence because it asks a different question. Not how many people work for me, but how many people are flourishing because of me. How many people are becoming better because of me. That question changes everything. Love transforms success into significance, and it carries us to the highest rung of the ladder, which is liberation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the journey ends. When you begin to ask a question, who becomes freer because I lived? Who becomes freer because I lived? Liberation. And strangely, this is where another journey begins with that question. Because freedom was never meant to end with you. It was always meant to begin with you. Think about that again. Think about Jesus. He did not come merely to become free. He came to proclaim freedom. Everything he did was directed towards restoring others. And this is the highest calling of entrepreneurship. Not merely to become wealthy, not merely to become successful, but to become a liberator. And I want to explain that. Every time you employ someone, you liberate them from unemployment. Every time you mentor a young entrepreneur, you liberate them from ignorance. Every time ethical business liberates society, every time ethical business liberates society from exploitation. Are you understanding this? Every innovation liberates people from unnecessary suffering. Every institution you build becomes a ladder someone else can climb. That is liberation. Do you remember how we began today? We began by asking, what is freedom? And now I believe we have our answer. Freedom is not simply living without chains. Freedom is becoming the kind of person through whom God removes chains from others. That is true freedom. And now I want you to notice something extraordinary. The freedom ladder ends exactly where the vision ladder begins. If you're not familiar with the vision ladder, I urge you to go and listen to the teaching on identifying and capturing opportunities. Where the freedom ladder ends, that is where the vision ladder begins. Because once you have become free, God asks another question. Now that you are free, what will you build? And that is vision. Freedom restores the builder. Vision directs the builder. One answers, who must I become? The other answers, what must I build? Together they describe the complete journey of the entrepreneur. So today I leave you with one final challenge. Don't try to climb the ladder this week. Climb one rung. If you're at recognition, tell yourself the truth. If you're at awakening, refuse to accept that your current reality is the final reality. If you're at renewal, replace one lie with one truth. If you're at preparation, develop one new capability. If you're at creation, build something. Anything, I beg you. If you're at ownership, acquire one productive asset. If you're at influence, strengthen someone else's life. And if you have reached liberation, build ladders that others can climb. Because Africa does not simply need more entrepreneurs. Africa needs liberated builders. Builders who are free enough to create, wise enough to steward, strong enough to influence, and humble enough to spend their entire lives setting others free. One day, history will ask what transformed Africa. And I pray the answer will not simply be better governments or stronger economies, but a generation of entrepreneurs who first climbed the freedom ladder, then climbed the vision ladder, and then devoted their lives to building enterprises, institutions, and movements that restored the dignity, prosperity, and hope of a continent. Builders, I urge you today to keep climbing. But one day you will reach the top. And the exhortation that I have for you is that when you do, don't admire the view. Build another ladder. Because someone else is waiting to climb. And on this I end today. With the hope that you will take that next step and move just one step up the ladder. And keep every day of your life reminding yourself that I have one more step to go. Because until and unless we all begin that climb, Africa will never be free. our freedom as individuals, as communities, as nations, and as a continent is tied to that process of going just one step up on that ladder. And I want you to think on that, to meditate on that. And not only that, but to take action on that. I thank you.